for this one, why do I receive the Eucharist? I thought about, it's victory, right? It's victory over death because, Christ had to live a human life, and he knew that at the end of it, he ultimately had to sacrifice himself to redeem mankind. And so thinking about the suffering of Christ, I had something happen. I had some very bad news from a very dear friend of mine. This was, I think, like 2 weeks ago. And so I received the news on a Thursday that they got breast cancer. And so I don't know how severe it was, but when you get that kind of a news, it's it's a big shock, right? Because you're looking at, okay, what does this mean? Am I gonna die? I gotta go to the hospital. I gotta suffer. And they're pretty young too. So it's probably even a bigger shock for a young person to hear that. And so, I talked to them on the phone, and later on that night, I was praying to God, how do I help? Can you transfer some of the suffering from them onto me? Because I know them very well, and I know their family situation, all this, and not really getting the kind of support that she needed, and very tough situation for her. And so I'm kind of limited in the way that I could help her, but at least one way that I know I could help her is through prayer and asking God, okay, I know I'm pretty good at suffering. I've kind of done that in a lot of different ways in my life. But can we transfer some of that over to me, Lord? So I prayed that during the nighttime, and then Friday I elect her. So I went to Mass, and then literally as soon as I got in the church, it was just I was so brokenhearted. Okay. And maybe I think some of you were there. Maybe you remember this. This is the lore. This is the backstory here. Okay. But I was there, and I was crying, and I was thinking about man, I need to get someone to replace me potentially. But then I was no, I can do it. And I'm praying to God and asking their Blessed Mother and Saint Joseph and Saint Joan of Arc. I'm asking for help from literally everyone, all the angels and saints. Okay. And it's okay, all right, I got it. And then I go up there, and then I do the reading, come back down. And then for the prayer intention, so, if you've ever lectured, for me, I like to kind of flip through, and I select, what is, what's kind of for me, calling for me, this is what I should, put out there for the people. But that day I was so torn up because of, all this suffering that I was going through, thinking about, the situation that they're in. And I didn't read the prayer intentions. So I read through one, and then I read the next one, and it was literally it was so on point. And this is when I kind of really it was just so shocking. I was oh my gosh, this is just so on point, because it was talking about praying for, the suffering of people. And so I thought immediately about, my friend and the situation that they were going through. And of course, all this was on display for the whole church, and I'm trying to hold it together so that I can get through this reading. Eventually I got through it. But, afterwards, because I sent this person an email, and I was hey, I did a prayer intention for you and all this. But, for me to be up there, and then, for the people that were there to kind of see kind of the suffering that I was going through, I don't really think that was my suffering. I think that was more of her suffering, because I specifically prayed to God the night before, hey, help her by just transferring some of this to me. And so, that was all on display that was all of her suffering, I think, on display for everyone. And I'm sure people were because I'm not crying up in the lector, okay? This is not what I do. But, I'm sure people were oh my gosh, I gotta pray, pray something for him. But all those prayer intentions that anyone, prayed that day or that morning, it was actually for her. So I told her this, hopefully this, helped her out because, she actually has the same patron saint as me, Saint Joan of Arc, but she doesn't come to Mass. And then lastly, to kind of, to center it back on Jesus here, but, with the rosary, one of the mysteries is when, Jesus, he's praying in the Garden of Olives, and he's asking the Father, like, hey, like, if this is possible, like, can this suffering, can we just pass this on? Can we do without? But ultimately, whatever is your will, like, let God's will be done. And so I thought about that as well. It was like, okay, like, I have to read, I have to do the lecturing, I have to overcome this really intense struggle and this suffering to ultimately get to the Eucharist, to receive the Eucharist, where, I'm basically in communion with Jesus Christ. And that's kind of the story of all of our lives, I think, like all this struggle and all the suffering, and then, hopefully at the end we're there with Jesus Christ, and all that suffering was worth it. Well, that's the story on why I like to receive the Eucharist. So now it's your guys' turn, right? So we have the prompts on the bottom, and this is going to be good. Yeah.